Okay, guys. For our writing lesson, we're adapting fairy tales, right? You should have been working on either Three Billy Goats Gruff or Little Red Riding Hood, and probably this week we will get to the point where you are going to be working on your own. You're going to be picking out a fairy tale. I'll show you how to do that in just a little bit, but you'll be picking out your own fairy tale, coming up with the adapting it, what you're going to change and how you're going to change it. Okay. So again, this is where we'll look at, we're talking about Goldilocks. That's the one that we've been talking about. Okay. So we talked about how we can change that and what we would change in it. Um, so while you're working on your fairy tale, you kind of can, um, you're going to story tell it. Or maybe if you want to, you can even act it out, to yourself. But you want to at least start at the beginning, right? You're going to start at the very beginning of your classic story. And this one is Goldilocks and the Three Bears. And we're going to make booklets or your notes to keep your notes in. All right. So what we're going to talk about first is maybe what the first scene is really. And then the first scene in Goldilocks and the Three Bears is talking about the three bears, right? They live in the woods, and it kind of tells us a little bit about what it is. Okay, so that's what our first scene is. And it talks about once there was three bears who lived in a house deep in the woods. The great big bear was Papa Bear, the middle-sized bear was Mama Bear, and the smallest was Baby Bear. So that's kind of telling us first, all right? And what are the bears doing in the beginning? That looks like they're just having fun as a family, right? Okay, so now we're going to plan on what's happening next. What do we want to change in our story? Well, if we go back and we look, we were talking about brown elox and the three bowls of cornflakes. Okay, so what did we change if we were looking at if I had to have written brownie locks in the three bowls of cornflakes in my fairy tale that I'm adapting was Goldilocks and the Three Bears? What did we change? What was one thing that we could change? And if we're going to talk about the first scene, what did we notice? What did we change? Okay, well, in this one, it goes right to where mom is setting out cereal, and in this case, it's the cornflakes, right? And then they talk about going for a walk before breakfast. Okay, so that was something that we changed. Okay, and if I was writing this out, I would plan that. Okay, I would know my classic fairy tale and be able to tell it. So if somebody was asking you about Little Red Riding Hood, you should be able to know the fairy tale and tell it out to somebody who might not have known it, right? And then you're going to decide what to change or improve on in the story. And if I was writing Brownie Locks, I would say, well, instead of three bowls of porridge, we're going to talk about three bowls of cornflakes. And they're going to go for a walk before breakfast. Because in this one, what happens if you put milk in cereal and leave it? It gets soggy, right? Yeah. Well, she just poured the cornflakes in a bowl, and then they were going to go out for a walk. So that was kind of our first part of our story. So, if I was writing this out in a version, that was one thing that I changed out. That was my first change. Okay. So then I need to make that change, make it lead to other changes so the whole story fits together a little different. Because if we go back, yes, we talk about how in Goldilocks and the Three Bears, what happens? They make their porridge and then they sit in their chairs. Oops, is it? Yeah, okay. So here, they don't really go for a walk. They have breakfast, right? And then they had their own bowls of porridge. So that was a little different. And then after the um, breakfast, the bears rested in the living room. They each had their own chairs. They each had their own bed. And then one morning, this is a little different. This is kind of where we pick it up, where Goldilocks, or in the other book, Brownylocks, comes and they knock on the door. Okay. Well, one thing that changes right away from that is looks like Brownylocks doesn't even knock on the door, does she? She just smells the cornflakes and comes right in through a window. She doesn't even knock, she just comes in. So we're making changes that lead to other changes, right? That will make the whole story fit together a little bit better. We look through, she breaks a chair. That's similar to the Goldilocks book. She breaks a chair too, right? And so this is our plan. This is what you should be planning. You're not writing out your stories just yet. You're planning your stories, okay? You're making changes so that they lead to other changes so that everything fits in together. Because if you don't do that, then your story isn't going to make sense. And granted, this is a fairy tale, it's fiction, right? So it doesn't necessarily have to be true, but it does need to flow. It needs to make sense. You've all read fairy tales. You've all read those type of books where one thing happens, another thing happens, and another thing happens. And that's what we're talking about, making your changes lead to other changes. And then you're going to make a character that will, with traits, and who maybe wants to run into trouble. Do we think that Goldilocks or Brownylocks are going to run into trouble? If I think about it, if I went to your house and broke into your house, I probably would get into trouble. If you break into my house, you're probably going to get in trouble, right? So think about those things. Your character with traits in this character trait, we think back to when we were looking at Because of Winn-Dixie. This bear is maybe a little adventurous or maybe a little curious, and that curiosity might get her into trouble because she's gone into some place through that window where she shouldn't have been going. So think about that as well. Make sure your character has traits that will show them getting into trouble. Because here, she smelled the cornflakes. Tasty, she thought, climbing in. Well, she wasn't invited. So think about that as you're writing it. Think about what happens first, and then how that's going to add to your story and how that's going to flow. Because very soon you're going to be doing this with your own stories. Right now, this is the beginning. We're going to talk about things that happen in the middle of your stories. Okay? So think about that. Remember to make sure that your decisions that you make that will affect your story, where you want your story to go, where you want it to end up. Think about those things, because now we're going to be in the next few lessons, you're going to be kind of picking and choosing your own, and you need to plan that out and listen to your story, read it out loud, so that way you can see where your story is going to go, right? Because you need to, you know, tell your story, and your story is going to be in small moment scenes. This is a small moment scene. You're going to have 2 or 3 of those where you're in the beginning. You're going to kind of have a middle where things kind of happen and things change over time and how they get into trouble. And then they're going to have where things kind of wrap up. That's what most of your fairy tales end up doing. Okay. So today you need to still be thinking about what's going to change. Make sure those changes fit into another story. This one is like how Brownylocks, she climbed into an open window. I might say then she goes and tries other chairs and ends up breaking one of them. That could lead to her getting in trouble. Then she decides to try out these beds and falls asleep. Would she get in trouble if she's caught? Absolutely. Then the family comes home and they see what's all happened. They can even see footprints in the chairs and on the floor. And then this Sam finds out that somebody ate all the cornflakes. That could get them in trouble. They find Brownylocks sleeping in the bed. So those are small moments of things that are going to get in trouble. Be thinking and planning out your writing in those small moments. You can say something along those lines that my character is going to to do this. Like once upon a time, or once upon a time there was this. Every day they did this. One day this happened. Because of that, this happened. Because of that, this happened. Until finally this happened. Okay? So that's what you're going to be kind of be thinking about. Once upon a time there was a brown bear. Every day the Brownylocks walked through the woods. One day, she took a different path to find someplace new. Because of that, she found Sam's house. Well, she was hungry and she found a new house. She went into Sam's house and ate cornflakes and broke a chair and fell asleep until finally she was caught. That's how you could use that formula to kind of make small moments and make sure that your character, and you're making changes so the whole story fits together. Your character wants and actually runs into trouble, and they're going to tell that story into 2 or 3 scenes, small moment stories. Okay. All right. Good luck with your writing.